My name is Elena Dawson, and for most of my life, I lived in the shadow of everyone else's expectations, not because I didn't try to shine, but because my light was never the kind they cared to see. I was the quiet child in a loud family, the soft one, the overlooked one, the one who didn't win trophies or host fundraisers or charm investors over brunch. In a house where achievements were framed and flaunted like family crests, I was the blank space no one wanted to explain. My father, Gerald Dawson, was the kind of man people respected because they feared him. Sharp suits, sharper words. He built the family business from the ground up, and he never let us forget it. Everything at our dinner table felt like a board meeting. My siblings, Levi, the eldest, and Kara, the youngest, knew how to play their parts. Levi was the business prodigy. He could read balance sheets at 16. Kara was the golden girl with the face that lit up rooms and earned pageant crowns, and me, I was always told I had a nice disposition, like a houseplant. I still remember the night Levi brought home his first business award. The whole family gathered in the dining room like it was a national holiday. My mother made steak, my father poured his best bourbon. They toasted to his future. I sat at the far end of the table, eating mashed potatoes in silence, and when I whispered that I'd gotten an A+ on my physics exam, no one heard me, or maybe they did, and they just didn't care. Levi had built a prototype. I'd solved equations. One of those things made headlines. The other was dismissed as cute. My father's favorite line, the one he seemed to save just for me, was, "Elena, you're too soft. This world not made for soft people." He said it with this mix of pity and frustration, like he was watching a bird try to swim. "You've got potential," he'd say, "but you waste it daydreaming." And every time I tried to tell him I was working on something real, something big, he'd chuckle and wave me off. "Ideas are cheap. Sweetheart, execution is everything." The irony is, I agreed with him. I just never told him how much I was executing behind the scenes. You see, I wasn't idle. I wasn't lost. I was just quiet about it. While Levi went to Ivy League networking events and Kara toured Europe on family money, I worked part-time jobs to pay rent and scraped together enough to buy a second-hand laptop. I stayed up till 3 a.m. learning code and business modeling. From free online courses, I built prototypes on weekends. I emailed pitch decks to angel investors under a fake name because I didn't want my family to trace anything back to me until I was ready. I was never trying to prove them wrong, not at first. I just wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't what they said I was, and yet, every family gathering chipped away at me. It wasn't the big insults that hurt the most, it was the small ones. The way my mother always forgot to mention me when listing her children's accomplishments to her friends, the way my father's eyes glazed over when I spoke, the way Levi would pat my shoulder like he was comforting a patient. And Kara, God bless her, she tried to be kind, but her pity stung worse than my father's scorn. "You're so creative, Elena," she'd say, smiling like a preschool teacher. I wish I had time for hobbies. I didn't tell them that I'd just landed a meeting with 2 venture capitalists, or that the startup I'd quietly co-founded with my friend Maya had just hit our first major funding milestone. Because I knew how they'd respond. They'd twist it into a backhanded compliment. They'd say something like, "That's cute. You'll probably learn a lot from it before moving on to something real." And so I stopped telling them anything at all. There's a strange sort of freedom in being underestimated. When no one expects you to succeed, they stop watching, they stop interfering, they leave you alone with your dreams. And that's where the real work begins. I let them believe I was failing, that I was floundering. I let them believe I was harmless. But deep down, I was building something. Brick by invisible brick, line of code by late night line of code. I was crafting a world that didn't need their approval to exist. Every slight they threw my way only fueled the quiet fire burning in my chest. I didn't want applause. I didn't need validation. I just wanted the chance to become everything they never thought I could be. And I never forgot the look in my father's eyes the last time we spoke before it all changed. He said, "You'll regret wasting your youth chasing fairy tales." I looked him in the eye and smiled. Not because he was right, but because I already knew how the story would end. He just didn't see it coming. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't show up in your face or your posture. It lives beneath your skin, somewhere deep, where even sleep can't touch it. That was the kind of tired I carried with me in those years after college. The kind you wear like a second soul. I worked shifts at the corner diner from 6 a.m. to noon. then went straight to the campus library where I helped students who were barely younger than me write their essays and fix their resumes. At night, when the city got quiet and the streetlights cast their tired glow on my small studio apartment, I turned on my battered laptop and taught myself how to build something from scratch. Most nights, I didn't eat until past midnight. I lived on instant noodles and dollar store oatmeal. I shared a hallway bathroom with 3 other tenants and taped plastic over my broken window in the winter. No one saw any of that, no one asked. My family assumed I dropped out of life, given up like they always feared I would. To them, I was floating, a girl too soft for structure, too kind for commerce, too quiet for anything of substance. But I wasn't floating, I was planting. Each article I read, each online lecture I watched, each failed line of code, it was a seed. And I watered them with my sweat and my hours and my relentless refusal to give up. I didn't know exactly where it would take me, but I knew, deep in my bones, that something was growing slowly, quietly, without applause. Sometimes, I cried on the floor of that apartment, I won't lie. There were nights when the silence felt like a judgment, when the lack of messages from anyone in my family made me wonder if I had truly been forgotten. They weren't cruel in an obvious way, just distant, dismissive. My father would occasionally send Levi's news clippings or Kara's new press photos in the family group chat, as if to remind me what real success looked like. I never replied. The only person who really saw me back then was Maya. We met at a community coding workshop. She was sharp and brash and brilliant in ways I wasn't, and she took to me like lightning to dry land. We were opposites, but we believed in the same thing, that the tech world didn't have to be ruled by the loudest voice in the room. We believed in quiet excellence, and we believed in each other. Together, we built a small idea into a working product. It wasn't glamorous at first, just a productivity tool for remote teams, designed with empathy in mind. But it worked, people liked it. We bootstrapped our way to a beta launch, then scraped together enough to pay for some targeted ads. The user base started growing slowly, steadily. Investors noticed. A few meetings followed, most of them failures. But one afternoon, a woman from a mid-sized VC firm leaned back in her chair and said, "You two have something. It's not loud, but it's real." I went home that night and stared at my cracked ceiling for an hour. I remembered how Levi once told me that people like me don't get past the pitch room, that I didn't have the sharpness, the steel, the presence, and maybe he was right, in the traditional sense. But Maya and I had something better. We had substance, and we had nothing to lose. Still, I didn't tell my family. Not when we secured seed funding, not when we made our first hire, not even when our product got featured on a tech blog. They weren't listening, and I wasn't building this to earn their applause. I was building it because I believed in it, and because I needed to prove to myself that my softness wasn't a flaw, but a different kind of strength. One afternoon, my mother called. That was rare. She asked how I was doing. I told her I was busy, working on something. She asked, "Still that computer thing?" Her voice had the same lilt people use when they talk about kids' art projects. I said yes. And before I could explain more, she switched the topic to Kara's new ad campaign and how stunning she looked in the photos. Then she said she had to go. I stared at the screen for a long time after the call ended. I wasn't angry, just empty. There is a loneliness in being unseen, even when you're doing everything right. But that loneliness eventually becomes armor. It hardens not your heart, but your resolve. And I wore mine with pride. I didn't post on social media. I didn't send updates to the family group chat. I let them believe I was floundering. I let them think I was fragile. All the while, the company grew, user by user, dollar by dollar. By the time our valuation crossed $10 million, we were still operating out of my living room. We didn't have a fancy office or a PR team, but we had something my family had. Never understood: integrity, grit, and the willingness to build without a spotlight. I wasn't failing, I was just doing it quietly. It wasn't one big moment that changed me. It was the slow erosion of doubt. The kind that crumbles stone with time and pressure. The kind that wears away at you until you wake up one morning and realize you're no longer asking for anyone's permission. That shift didn't come from success or validation. It came from exhaustion, from being done with shrinking myself to make others comfortable. The real spark came on a cold evening in early November. I was visiting home for my father's birthday. It had been a while, maybe a year or more, since I'd last seen them in person. I didn't want to go, but Maya said I should. You've come so far, she told me. Maybe now they'll see it. I don't know what I expected, maybe some interest, some curiosity, maybe even a sliver of respect. Instead, I walked into the same old scene. The house hadn't changed. Same polished floors, same portraits on the wall, my father, arms crossed, standing beneath the photo of himself shaking hands with a senator, my mother, delicate and distracted, fussing with wine glasses. Kara was glowing. All silk and perfume, fresh from a photo shoot. Levi was talking to one of our father's old business friends about overseas investments, and me. I might as well have been a houseplant again. They greeted me like they were checking off a name on a guest list. My mother kissed my cheek and told me I looked rested, which I think was code for forgettable. Levi nodded and said, "Still doing your tech hobby?" I laughed, not loudly, not bitterly, just enough for him to hear it and tilt his head. I said nothing. I smiled and sipped the cheap white wine and sat through a dinner where my name wasn't mentioned once during the toasts. My father gave a speech about legacy and resilience, about building something from the ground up. Everyone applauded. I clapped too, out of habit, but something inside me had shifted. After dinner, I stood by the back window and looked out at the garden. I remembered being 10 years old, reading books under that old oak tree while my siblings played games that always somehow excluded me. Even then, I knew I was different, quieter, more inward. I didn't need attention the way they did, but that didn't mean I didn't want to be seen. That night, I didn't cry, I didn't sulk. I just watched them from a distance and realized something startling. I didn't need them anymore. I had spent so many years trying to earn their love, their respect, their acknowledgement. But the truth was, I had already built a life outside of them, a richer, harder, more honest life, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a failure in their house. I felt like a visitor. On the way home, I didn't call Maya, I didn't rant or replay the conversations in my head. I simply opened my laptop and dove back into work, not because I had something to prove, but because I had something to protect. The company wasn't just a business, it was my breath, my escape, my rebellion against everything they believed about me. From that point on, I changed. I stopped second-guessing myself in meetings. I stopped comparing my choices to theirs. I began speaking up more, pushing harder, trusting my instincts. When Maya and I debated over direction, I didn't defer the way I used to. I stood my ground. I fought for what I knew was right, not because I needed to win, but because I believed in what we were building. And people started noticing. Investors leaned in when I spoke. Our new hires looked to me for leadership. Maya began calling me the Quiet Storm, a nickname that made me laugh because it felt so fitting. I wasn't loud, I wasn't flashy, but I was relentless. And every day, that quiet defiance grew inside me. The world doesn't prepare you for that moment. The moment you stop asking to be chosen and start choosing yourself. It sneaks up on you. One day, you're still explaining your worth. The next, you realize you don't owe anyone an explanation at all. I kept building. We secured another round of funding. Our user base tripled. I started taking meetings with firms that once wouldn't return my emails. We hired people smarter than me, people who challenged us, who pushed the company into new territory. And through it all, I kept my name off the headlines, not out of fear, but strategy, because I wasn't just building a company anymore, I was laying a trap. I didn't know exactly when or how it would come together, but I knew one thing for sure. The family that once ignored me would one day be forced to see me, not through the lens of regret or sentiment, not even through apology. They would see me because I would own the very thing they treasured most. And when that moment came, I wouldn't raise my voice or seek revenge. I would simply take my seat at the head of the table and let the silence speak for me. By the time the next holiday rolled around, I had changed in ways they couldn't see. Maybe I looked the same, still soft-spoken, still polite, still the one who didn't interrupt or draw attention to herself, but inside, everything had shifted. I was no longer standing outside the family circle, hoping for a hand to pull me in. I had built a world beyond that circle, one they didn't even know existed. But sometimes you go back, not because you want to, but because a part of you still aches to be acknowledged. To see if anything has changed, if anyone has noticed. Thanksgiving was hosted at Levi's house that year. It was larger than I remembered, sleek and expensive, all marble and glass. I walked through the door holding a bottle of wine I knew no one would drink, wearing a dress I had second-guessed twice before leaving home. The air smelled like roasted meat and too much perfume. Laughter echoed from the kitchen. "Look who made it," Levi said when he saw me, smiling like he was doing me a favor by acknowledging my presence. "Thought you'd be too busy coding in your cave," I smiled, keeping my hands folded so he wouldn't see how tightly I was holding on to my patience. "Just figured I'd drop in before the world collapses from your absence," he laughed, not because I was funny, but because he assumed I wasn't dangerous. That was the thing about my family. They were so used to me being invisible they never noticed when I started seeing everything clearly. Dinner was as performative as ever. Kara talked about her recent brand deal, how she might be flying to Milan next month. My father boomed about quarterly returns and how the market was finally respecting his vision again. My mother fussed about the table linens and I sat there like a ghost, present but not really. No one asked about me. No one even pretended to wonder what I was doing. They talked around me like I was furniture. At one point, my father asked Levi about a potential merger with a smaller company that had been struggling for a few quarters. "It's a digital thing," he said, waving his hand. "Young founders, app-based, might be worth acquiring before they figure out what they're sitting on." I knew exactly which company he was talking about. It was ours. Not Maya and I, not yet, but a competitor we had just outpaced, one we were already in talks with. I watched Levi speak, watched him reduce the work of others to numbers and guesses. I wondered how many times he had done the same to me in his mind. How many conversations I'd never heard where my name was followed by sighs or laughter. I cut into my turkey slowly, said nothing. "Not yet." Then my father looked at me and said, "Still working that remote job thing?" I nodded. "Yes, we're doing pretty well, actually." "Well," he said, already bored with the topic, "it's good to stay busy." Stay busy, that's all they thought I was doing. Staying busy, killing time until I gave up or came crawling back. The part that stung wasn't the dismissal. It was the confidence with which they delivered it, like it was a settled fact. Not even worth challenging. I could have told them then. Could have laid the facts out across the table like a royal flush. I could have listed our growth numbers, the investors who now fought for a seat at our table, the praise we'd received from publications they respected. I could have said, "Actually, your competitor, we're acquiring them next month," but I didn't. I sat with their dismissal and let it harden into resolve. Because I finally understood something vital. They didn't need to believe in me. They never had, and yet, here I was, alive, successful, building something with more value than any of their titles or trophies. Their belief had never been the missing piece. I was no longer hungry for their pride. I was just hungry for the finish line. The meal ended, and I cleared my own plate. No one noticed. As I walked to the kitchen, I heard Levi bragging to a cousin about how he might be CEO within the year. My mother was praising Kara's latest photo shoot. My father leaned back in his chair, smiling at the kingdom he thought he still controlled, and I stood by the sink, rinsing off the last trace of dinner, thinking, "You don't even know I'm already at the gates." I left before dessert. No goodbyes, no excuses. Just slipped out into the night, the wind cold against my cheeks. I walked back to my car, started the engine, and sat there for a moment, staring at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired, maybe even a little sad, but I was done being the ghost at their table. Soon enough, they would be sitting at mine. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when you finally stop trying to be seen. Not a surrender, not giving up, but a letting go. I stopped waiting for recognition. I stopped hoping someone would ask how I was really doing. I stepped fully into the shadows where I'd always been, only this time, I made them mine. While my family stayed busy with their public lives, the galas, the press releases, the polished dinners, I was in the thick of building something real. Our startup wasn't just surviving anymore. It was thriving. The product we'd worked on for months was finally gaining momentum. We had users writing in, telling us how our tool helped them feel more human in a digital world. Teams that felt scattered were finally connecting. People were listening. Investors were paying attention, and yet, I said nothing. I kept my name off the headlines. Maya and I agreed early on that we didn't need to be the faces. The work could speak louder than we ever could. She handled the louder rooms, the panels, and interviews. I handled the quiet parts, the roadmaps, the product vision, The team culture, we were opposites, but we moved like one. It was in that quiet, away from my family's noise, that I learned what power really looked like. Not domination, not applause, but clarity, knowing exactly what you're building and why, knowing how to say no, knowing what's worth your time and what's just ego dressed up as opportunity. I had none of the flash they loved, no glossy LinkedIn posts, no networking brunches. But I had something better, a team that trusted me, and a product that was growing faster than we could have planned. Every week brought in new users, new milestones. Every month, our valuation ticked upward. We brought on engineers I had once only dreamed of hiring. We moved into an office space that still smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Still, I didn't call my family. They didn't know I was co-founder of the very kind of company my father always claimed was all hype. They didn't know that our name was beginning to come up in conversations with venture capitalists who used to sit at my brother's tables. They didn't know that in meetings where Levi's name was once mentioned, mine had started replacing his. Softly, but surely. I didn't tell them when our product was adopted by a major remote work platform. I didn't tell them when an article quietly described us as a rising disruptor, because I wasn't ready, not yet. I wanted the moment to be complete. I wanted it to be undeniable. And more than anything, I wanted them to walk straight into it, unaware, still convinced of their superiority, only to find me waiting. And so I watched as my father's company, once revered, began to waver. Their systems were outdated, their leadership, arrogant and slow to change. The market was shifting beneath them, and they didn't even see it. Their stock dipped slightly, then plateaued. Articles whispered about strategic blind spots. I paid attention to every move, every acquisition rumor, every leadership shuffle. When the whispers of restructuring began, I started reaching out through a proxy firm. An old friend of mine helped set up the conversations. We used no names, only numbers. We framed it as a lifeline, a potential merger, a strategic investment in the name of modernization. They bit, of course they did. Desperation makes even the proudest men reach for help, especially when they think the hand is anonymous. I kept my distance. I watched from the shadows as they circled around our offer. I read the board's emails, scanned through their concerns and ambitions. My father, still the loudest voice, insisted they maintain control in name and culture. He didn't care who the buyer was, so long as the Dawson name stayed above the door. That suited me fine. I didn't want the name, I wanted the company. And I wanted them to watch as everything they had ignored, everything they had mocked, quietly swallowed their legacy. Hold up. Maya was careful, precise. She asked me again and again, "Are you sure you want this? Not just the acquisition, but the confrontation." She knew what it would mean, the line we would cross. I told her I wasn't doing this out of spite, I was doing it out of principle. For every time I was laughed at, for every time my ideas were brushed aside, for every dinner where I was invisible, for every lie they told themselves about who I was and what I could never be, but more than that, I was doing it for myself. For the girl who stayed up all night learning code she didn't understand, for the woman who built her own future in silence, for the version of me that no one clapped for, not because she wasn't worthy, but because no one was looking. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming. And the next time they saw me, I wouldn't be standing in the corner of their rooms, trying to be heard. I would be standing at the center of everything they thought they owned, and they wouldn't even see it coming. The first time I saw the draft of the merger proposal with my family's company, I didn't feel triumph. I felt stillness, a quiet, deliberate stillness, like standing in a room I'd already visited in my dreams. Every corner familiar, every shadow expected. It was happening, not in theory, not in fantasy and ink on paper. Their legacy was being restructured, and I was the architect they never saw behind the blueprints. Maya handed me the file across the table in our office, a glass-walled room filled with plants, sunlight, and everything we'd built from the ground up. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. We both understood the weight of what we were about to do. She had reservations, of course, she always had, but she also believed in justice. Not the loud kind, not the kind that parades itself, the quiet, precise kind, the kind that arrives with a clean signature and a polite smile. We were acquiring them through a holding company, a silent partner we had vetted carefully. Not a single name on the paperwork would connect to mine. The legal team did their job well, Their due diligence was superficial. My father and his board were too proud, too pressed for time, too unwilling to believe that someone like me could be capable of such a move. They saw the offer as a lifeline, not a warning, and they took it. It made sense to them. The company behind the acquisition had a clean history, a track record of investing in forward-thinking tech. Their branding was modern, their leadership discreet, and the numbers were fair, more than fair. Actually, we'd padded the deal just enough to make them feel clever for saying yes. There was no resistance, no digging, no suspicion. My father insisted the deal move quickly. He wanted to finalize it before the next quarter to stabilize investor confidence. I watched him from afar. Through briefings and email updates, I saw how he spoke in meetings, still with that same authority, still believing he was 10 steps ahead. He didn't know he was standing on a chessboard I had been setting up for years. The irony of it all was bitter and beautiful. He had spent his life teaching us that strength meant control, that power belonged to those who spoke the loudest, who made the boldest moves, and yet, it was my silence, my deliberate invisibility, that allowed me to dismantle his empire. From the inside out. I remember the night I signed the final paperwork. It was just past midnight. The office was empty, the city quiet beneath the windows. I held the pen for a long time before putting it to paper. I thought of every version of myself that had come before. The teenager hiding in the library, the college student working double shifts, the young woman building prototypes by candlelight. They were all in the room with me. I signed. And in that moment, I felt no need for revenge, no rage, just peace. It wasn't about taking something from them. It was about taking something back for myself. The day the deal was announced internally, my family received formal invitations to a leadership transition meeting. They had no idea what was coming. Levi likely thought it was a standard briefing. My father, I imagined, was preparing to assert control, to guide the new executives, to remind them whose name built the company. Kara probably didn't care enough to ask questions. None of them suspected the truth. That was the final gift they gave me. Their arrogance. Maya offered to stand in for me at the announcement. She said I didn't owe them anything, that I could let the papers speak. But I told her no, I wanted to be there, not for drama, not for spectacle, but for closure. They needed to see what they never saw coming, not because I wanted to hurt them, but because they needed to understand what happens when you ignore someone long enough. They needed to learn that the shadows they so often dismissed can carry more weight than the spotlights they see. As the meeting approached, I didn't feel nervous. I felt ready. I chose my outfit carefully, not a power suit, not something to shock, just simple, clean, composed. I wore no jewelry except for the watch my grandmother had given me when I was 16, the one I wore on the night of my high school graduation, when no one showed up. Time had always been my ally. When I stepped into the conference room on the 20th floor of a downtown high-rise, the first faces I saw were familiar. Levi in a tailored suit, checking his phone, Kara sipping coffee, barely alert, my mother glancing around, confused, and my father, seated at the head of the table for now. He looked up when the doors closed behind me. He didn't recognize me. At first. Not because I looked so different, but because he had never really looked at me at all. And I smiled, not out of spite, but because I was finally ready to speak, without saying a single word. The room was silent the moment I walked in, though no one quite understood why yet, not fully. They looked up from their murmured conversations, their coffees, their phones. I saw the flicker of recognition in my mother's eyes first, a hesitation. Like she wasn't quite sure if it was me or just someone who looked vaguely familiar. Levi, distracted by whatever deal he was texting about, barely glanced up. Kara didn't look at all. My father was in mid-sentence, laughing at some private joke with an advisor near the corner of the long conference table. But when I reached the front of the room, placed the thin black folder in front of my seat, and took the chair at the head of the table, the one my father had occupied since I was a child, everything stopped. The air changed. The kind of stillness that settles when something sacred is being undone. Levi was the first to speak. What? He blinked at me, as if seeing a ghost. Elena. I didn't respond immediately. I opened the folder slowly, methodically. I gave them the same silence they had once given me. My father cleared his throat. What is this? I looked up, my eyes resting on his face with quiet calm. Believe you've all met the new executive team, I said, voice steady. We've finalized the acquisition. Effective immediately, your company will operate under our holding firm. Their eyes flickered, searching for sense, for names, for someone else in the room to explain what I just said. My mother leaned forward. Acquisition. Her voice cracked in that soft, breakable way she used when she didn't want to be embarrassed. But that's not possible. Your father, he owns. He did, I said gently. Not anymore. Levi laughed, actually laughed, loud and sharp and forced. You can't be serious. This is ridiculous. What are you, the assistant to someone on the board? No, I said. I'm the board. Kara finally looked up from her phone, her eyes narrowing as she tried to process the unfolding moment. Wait, what do you mean you're the board? I said, folding my hands. I'm the co-founder of the tech company that acquired this business. We purchased it through a restructuring firm 6 months ago. The vote passed unanimously. The documents are public. I'm the new CEO. The silence that followed wasn't shock at first. It was confusion. They were trying to undo what they thought they knew. The world they lived in didn't have room for me in this role. They had never made space for the idea of me being powerful, let alone in control of what they considered their birthright. And then slowly, their faces began to change. My father was the last to fully grasp it. He stood slowly, as if refusing to sit beneath someone he still couldn't believe had outranked him. His voice was low, nearly a growl. You don't understand what you've done. I looked at him for a long moment, not with anger, but with something quieter, a kind of mourning. No, I said, you don't understand what I've done. I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. You taught me to be tough, that this world wasn't made for softness. You dismissed me because I wasn't loud, because I didn't perform strength the way you do. But you were wrong. Strength doesn't need to shout, it doesn't need to parade, it builds, it waits, and it moves when the moment is right. No one spoke. I could see the panic rising behind Levi's eyes, the realization that all his bluster and polish had done nothing to stop me. Kara looked embarrassed, shrinking into her chair. My mother looked like she might cry, though I didn't know if it was grief or shame. My father stood motionless, his pride cracked clean down the middle. I never needed to destroy you, I continued, I only needed to outgrow you. There were no raised voices, no drama, just a quiet shifting of gravity in the room. I'm not here to hurt anyone, I said. The company will continue. Employees will be retained. Your roles will be evaluated based on merit. There's no need for chaos, just transition. My voice didn't shake, not once. The same girl they had once told to lower her voice had just taken the seat they spent their lives guarding, and she did it without breaking a single rule, without shouting, without apology. I stood up. The meeting concluded in every way that mattered. As I gathered my papers, I felt Levi's eyes on me, still searching for weakness, for some way to dismiss this. I gave him none. As I reached the door, my father finally spoke. His voice low and brittle. Elena, I turned. He didn't finish his sentence. I don't think he knew what to say. So I gave him the only words I'd rehearsed. You may not recognize me as family, I said, but you'll remember me as your CEO. And then I walked out, steady and sure, as the weight of everything they never saw collapsed behind me. There was no press release that day. No grand announcement with flashing lights or staged photos. Just a sealed transition file, a signed deal, and a stunned boardroom. I didn't need headlines. The moment itself was enough. Quiet, irreversible, and completely mine. The hours after that meeting were strangely calm. You'd expect chaos, maybe confrontation, but that's not how it happened. The people who had once looked past me now kept their distance. Some nodded politely in hallways, others avoided eye contact altogether. It wasn't fear I saw in their faces, it was confusion. They didn't know how to reconcile the girl they had ignored for so long with the woman now sitting at the top of their hierarchy. And maybe that was the point. The following week was filled with operational meetings, transition calls, legal briefings. I attended every one, not because I had something to prove, but because I wanted to do it right. I wasn't interested in revenge that burned the whole place down. I wanted a legacy that could grow beyond ego. Still, word spread, whispers moved through the building like static. Some of the older staff remembered me vaguely. Isn't she one of the Dawson kids? Others had no clue who I was and simply saw a composed woman leading with calm precision. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't need to. My presence was explanation enough. What surprised me, though, was how my family responded, or rather, how they didn't. Levi didn't call, not once. I heard through an internal source that he'd tried to rally a few board members to challenge the transition. It didn't go far. The votes were already locked. The paperwork was airtight. Still, it amused me how quickly he moved from shock to strategy, never pausing to ask the one question that might have mattered. Why? Kara posted something vague on social media a few days later. A picture of herself at a cafe captioned, "When one door closes, look for a window with better light." I almost laughed. Even her grief was cured. My mother sent an email. Short, barely 3 lines, no questions. Just, "I hope you're doing well. Let us know if we need to collect anything from the offices." It felt more like someone moving out of a rental than leaving behind a legacy, but it was my father's silence that said the most. For over a week, I heard nothing, no calls, no messages, not a word. Then late one evening, after the building had emptied out and the office lights dimmed, I heard a knock on the door. It was him. He stood there in a dark wool coat, older than I remembered. For the first time, he looked small, not physically but in presence. As if something had been taken from him that he didn't know how to name. I gestured for him to come in. He did, slowly, like a man entering a museum of his former life. He didn't sit. Neither did I. For a long time, we just stood there, the air heavy between us. Finally, he spoke. "You were always quiet," he said, "even when you were little. I never knew what you were thinking." I didn't respond. He looked around the room, at the whiteboards, the folders, the notes taped to the glass. The machinery of the future he never thought I was capable of building. "I underestimated you," he said, voice low, almost a whisper. I nodded. "Yes, you did." His eyes met mine. And for the first time, I saw something unfamiliar in them. Not pride, not regret, just recognition, the kind that comes too late. "I thought I was protecting you," he said. "I thought if I made you tough, if I pushed you hard enough." "You didn't push me," I interrupted. "You dismissed me." The words sat between us like a truth too heavy to carry. He looked away. "You're right," he said. It wasn't an apology, but it was close. After a long pause, he took a step toward the door, then he turned back, as if wrestling with something he couldn't quite let go of. "This company, it was everything to me." I let the silence stretch before I answered. "It was everything to me too. Not because of what it gave me, but because of what it took from me." He nodded once, then left. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. I just sat at my desk and looked out the window as the city blinked its indifferent lights back at me. That night, I walked home slowly, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to feel the moment, to remember what it was like to take back your life without screaming for it. I never needed revenge. I didn't want their pain. I only wanted them to see me. And now they did, not as the soft one, not as the dreamer, but as the woman who rebuilt herself in silence, and returned to claim what no one ever thought she could hold. You'd think that after something like that, a reveal, a reversal, a reclamation, the days that follow would feel different, bigger, louder, brighter, but life doesn't always announce its changes with trumpets. Sometimes, the most profound shifts arrive in whispers, in long silences, in moments where the world feels almost too still, like it's waiting to see what you'll do next. After the takeover, things didn't explode. They unraveled slowly. Levi stopped coming to the office. Officially, he was on sabbatical, taking time to reassess his future plans. Unofficially, he was furious. He'd built so much of his identity around power, and now it sat just out of his reach, in the hands of the sister he never believed was capable of more than daydreams and distractions. I didn't hear from him directly, but mutual colleagues mentioned he was still trying to spin the story, that I'd tricked them, that it was a hostile move, that I was ungrateful. I let him talk, let the wind wear itself out. My mother sent another email, longer this time. She didn't apologize. Instead, she wrote about how she hoped I'd treat the family legacy with care, how hard my father had worked, how much pressure Levi had been under. The language was soft, elegant, polished, like always, but there was something behind it too, a slight trembling in the tone, a quiet panic hidden between the lines. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, because I was tired. Tired of being asked to carry their comfort while they ignored my wounds. Kara showed up, unannounced, one afternoon. She wore oversized sunglasses and a designer coat, looking like she was trying to outrun the internet. She came into my office without knocking and sat down across from me like she owned the space. "You've really made it," she said, eyes scanning the room. "I have," I replied. She nodded, and for a moment I thought she might say something real. But instead, she smiled, brittle and charming, and asked if I could help her land a brand partnership through one of the companies we'd recently acquired. That was the moment I realized she still didn't understand what had changed. They all thought this was about roles, titles, transactions. But for me, it was about identity. About becoming someone they could no longer deny existed. Still, I gave her the name of someone on the PR team, not because she deserved it, but because I didn't need to withhold anything anymore. Power, when real, doesn't flinch or retaliate, it just stands steady. The employees of the company, on the other hand, began to adapt. Some were cautious, watching to see if I was just another rich kid with a point to prove. Others were openly relieved. I didn't run things with fear. I wasn't interested in domination. I was interested in clarity, vision, purpose. I made changes where necessary, cut the dead wood, promoted people who had gone overlooked for too long. Slowly, things began to shift. The culture softened, not in weakness, but in trust. People started speaking up more, taking creative risks, showing up without armor. We were doing something different, and it was working. And still, at night, I thought about them, my family. Not with longing, not even with anger, but with a quiet ache, the kind that comes from realizing some doors never truly open, no matter how much you knock. I had spent so many years believing that if I just achieved enough, proved enough, earned enough, they would finally see me. But now that I had done all of that, more than they ever dreamed I could, I understood the truth. Some people are too wrapped in their own reflection to see anything else. And that wasn't mine to fix. What surprised me most was the grief, not for them, but for the girl I used to be, the one who waited at windows, who rehearsed conversations in her head, who bent herself into quieter shapes just to stay in the room. I missed her sometimes. She had such hope, such softness, even when it hurt, and I mourned what she had to lose in order for me to become this version of myself. But I also thanked her, because without her, I wouldn't be here. Without her, I wouldn't have built all this from nothing. Every night I walked the halls of that building, the one that had belonged to my father, now reshaped with my hands. I touched the cold metal railings. I sat in the empty conference rooms. I watched the lights of the city blink against the glass, and I felt a kind of quiet peace I'd never known before. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need their applause. I had something better. I had myself, and I had the proof of everything they said I'd never be. The day I cleared my old notebooks from the back shelf of my apartment, I found a list I had written years ago, goals scribbled in fading pen, edges worn from handling. Most of them were simple: finish school, build a product, find one investor, make rent on time, be seen. That last one, be seen, nearly made me cry, not because it hurt anymore, but because I no longer needed it. There's something strange about getting everything you once begged the universe for. You'd think the joy would be louder, more explosive, but for me, it came as a stillness, a long exhale after years of holding my breath. I had arrived at a place I once thought impossible, and now, standing in the heart of it, all I wanted was peace. The company continued to grow. We entered new markets, launched new features, hired people who brought color and soul into the rooms. Maya and I created a culture that made space for voices like mine, quiet, thoughtful, deliberate. We didn't chase headlines, we chased impact. And slowly, without noise or spectacle, we became the kind of place I'd dreamed about when I was still pulling midnight shifts and surviving on coffee. People asked me if I ever thought about giving the company a different name, one tied to the family, to the legacy I had reclaimed, but I said no, because it wasn't about rewriting their story, it was about writing my own. I didn't need their name behind mine to prove what I was capable of. I was done living in Reflections. One morning, a few months after the transition, I walked through the building just as the sun was rising. The halls were empty, bathed in gold light. I passed the old boardroom, the same room where I once sat, watching my family struggle to make sense of what I had become, and I paused. There was no anger in me anymore, no hunger to prove or defend, just a quiet gratitude that I had survived their indifference, that I had grown something out of silence, that I hadn't let their small view of me become the borders of my life. I visited the diner where I used to work, the same cracked vinyl booths, the same chipped mugs, The owner recognized me and smiled. Said I looked different. I told him I felt different. He asked what I was doing now, and I said, building things. He laughed and said, still dreaming. Big, huh, and I realized, that dreamer they once mocked never really left me. She just got smarter about where she spent her light. Sometimes I see my father's name in the news, in the footnotes of stories about shifting leadership, about changing tides in traditional firms. There's a certain sadness in it, I imagine, to build a world so carefully, only to watch it be reshaped by the one person you never thought would matter. He never reached out again after that night in my office, and that was fine. I didn't need more from him. He gave me what he could, even if all he ever offered was rejection sometimes. That's enough to light the fuse you need to build a different kind of life. Levi moved abroad. From what I heard, started consulting. He made no public comments about the company. Kara leaned into her lifestyle brand, posting photos of beaches and lattes with captions about reinvention. Our conversations, if they ever happen now, are short and polite. We are not enemies. We are simply done pretending to be something we never were. My mother sent a letter once. Not an email, a real letter in her fragile, looping handwriting. She didn't say sorry, but she said she was proud of me. I read it twice, folded it gently, and tucked it in a drawer. Maybe one day I'll read it again. Maybe I won't. What I know is this. I no longer wake up with that ache in my chest. I no longer walk into rooms bracing for dismissal. I've stopped shrinking myself for people who refuse to look closely. I take up space now, not loudly, not aggressively, just fully. I lead with the same softness they once mistook for weakness. I build with the same patience they once laughed at. And I love with a heart that's still open even after everything. The past will always be part of me. The family, the silence, the hunger. The long nights where I wondered if I'd ever be enough, but it no longer defines me. I carry it like a well-worn book, one I've read cover to cover, one I no longer have to quote from to explain myself. This is the story I tell now. I was overlooked. I was underestimated, and then I became the kind of woman who didn't need to explain her worth, because her life did that for her. I didn't need to win them over. I didn't need their applause. I just needed to become the version of myself I always knew was waiting on the other side of their silence. And now that I've found her, I'm never letting her go. If you've ever been underestimated or cast aside by your own family, this story is for you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories of quiet revenge and unexpected comebacks.